because I basically say, like, I think the reason that this political class doesn't take me seriously is because of how I talk. And Rory Stewart comes back and says, I think it's because of your class anger, which is basically, it's because of how you talk.
Yeah.
The recent podcast from Jimmy the Giant and Gary Stevenson of Gary's Economics is, as the title and thumbnail make clear, about class, or class as they call it. But I was struck by how much of their hour-long plus conversation is about accents.
You can see how just accent, background and stuff affects whether people trust you.
They think working class, probably stupid, probably a liar. And that's coming from the way that I speak.
Because he speaks in like a well-to-do middle class.
He's got a middle class accent, yeah.
So accents, my favourite subject. So I thought I'd give some reactions to the podcast and actually try to test whether Gary and Jimmy are right that their accents prevent people taking them seriously.
Did you see Rory Sutherland go on IEA the other day?
No, I didn't.
Now, to do an experiment like this, we need to know what we're talking about, socially and phonetically. And if I'm playing around with sound in ways that potentially have important consequences, I need good audio. So I'm super grateful that this video is sponsored by Raycon. And I want to let you know about Raycon's essential open earbuds, which keep your ears open while still delivering crystal clear sound. I literally just caught a package delivery that I might have missed without these open earbuds. Because they sit just outside your ear canal, you can focus on your podcasts or music, but stay tuned in to whatever's happening around you. When you're outdoors, that means safety when there's traffic about. The essential open buds are super light, and the flexible, breathable design makes them comfy for long-term listening. And here's the real kicker. Raycons give high-class sound quality at decidedly not so high-class prices. As regular viewers may remember, I paid at least 3 times as much for a well-known brand of earbuds, but it really is my Raycons I turn to every time for audio and comfort. By ordering Raycons, you'll be supporting my channel, and with Black Friday around the corner, Raycon audio products are up to 30% off site-wide. From everyday essentials to the latest releases, it's the perfect time to upgrade your sound or get ahead on gifting. These early deals won't last long. Shop now before they're gone. Just click the link in the description or go to buyraycon.com/JeffOpen to get up to 30% off during Raycon's Black Friday and Cyber Monday sale. Gary Stevenson is an ex-financial trader and now YouTuber who campaigns for wealth taxes to combat inequality, and Jimmy, real name Cyrano, makes videos on culture and politics. I enjoy both their channels, but here we're discussing not their economic or political views, but the relation between accent and class, something anyone who works on so-called standard British pronunciation inevitably comes up against. Let's start with the phonetics of Gary and Jimmy themselves. Gary's a Londoner and Jimmy's from Luton, commuting distance to London. Gary clearly considers himself to have a working class accent, and Jimmy...
My area is very working class, and then when I went to school, I was like thrown into more middle class areas.
Phonetically, Jimmy aligns more with the working class side of his background, so he broadly sounds like Gary. One small example, both use glottal stop for T inside words between vowels.
Noticed heating better, creating, getting, dominating.
Their accents aren't identical though. Take the price vowel, the I in price, time, like. It's a classic social marker. Working class London or Cockney had a very back vowel, oi, which spread to surrounding counties as far as Luton, so Jimmy says life.
Life.
Meanwhile, in London itself, multicultural London English MLE evolved, shifting that vowel forward again. So MLE has like, and we can hear that influence on Gary, who grew up in multicultural Ilford.
You know what I mean?
So both have quite broad London area accents. Now, what about the middle class accent they're referring to? The one they think would be taken more seriously? Well, Jimmy gives it a name, RP.
This is why we created like RP, that way of speaking that news presenters have.
As my viewers know, I wrote a book called English After RP, so I wouldn't refer to today's newsreader accent as RP. So who's right, Jimmy or me? Well, it used to be crystal clear what the term RP meant, what it sounded like and who spoke it. Today it causes massive confusion. Outside Britain, it's still used for the sort of British English people hear from actors, online dictionaries, and yes, news presenters. If that's what you think RP is, it's alive and well. Inside Britain? Very different. Academics have been avoiding the term for decades when describing contemporary speech. The 1999 IPA handbook used SSB, Standard Southern British, as the equivalent of what had previously been known as RP. Equivalent, that's not identical. Something more modern than RP. RP had been defined from the start as the accent of the social elite. Daniel Jones literally called it public school pronunciation, and in Britain, public school, of course, means the exclusive private ones. Then the 1960s happened, bringing glamorous people from the working classes, state-educated prime ministers, TV satire mocking the elite. Overnight, the upper-class sound became laughable. Sounding posh became a liability, which is why William and Harry sound very different from their father and grandmother. Here in Britain, that association, poshness with RP, never really disappeared. Journalists routinely use RP to mean very posh and or out of touch. A few months ago, the news magazine The New Statesman had a piece about the Henley Royal Regatta, an annual event on the River Thames frequented by posh people who, according to the article, are living in the past. Is this the last place in Britain that still thinks Lord Salisbury is Prime Minister? The pull quote, chosen by the editor to get people's attention, referred to the sound bath or bath of RP that the journalist said she was drowning in. This view of RP is common. The standard, received pronunciation is as reassuring as new slippers, perfect for reading poetry and eulogies. But sounding like a hooray Henry
Hooray Henry
is not a gift when trying to enchant someone into bed, or when trying to communicate on pretty much any level. Some commentators are clear that RP has shuffled off its mortal coil and ceased to be.
By the World Cup in 1966, RP was on its way out.
This was the moment of the angry young men, kitchen sink drama, the beginning of the end for received pronunciation.
Meanwhile, in the British English teaching world, things are more confused. Some teachers use RP to mean pretty much whatever accent they themselves have.
We're going to look at the standard RP that I speak, more or less.
So posh must be something else, while others trade precisely on the idea that RP itself is posh, because so many L2 learners out there are in love with British poshness, unaware how much British people don't want to sound posh if they want to avoid being laughed at or laughed at. The ELT industry may have to have the term RP pried from its cold, dead hands because RP sells. Of course, British EFL phonetics has not helped, turning a deaf ear to so many changes and preserving, like saints' bones, the old vowel symbols that described the pre-1960s elite accent. If young men lack posh books and learn speech far too broad, those sounds by boys make clear they're poor. So when Jimmy refers to RP as how news presenters speak, I wouldn't call that RP, but he's doing the same thing as those journalists in using RP to mean that accent over there, spoken by those other people, not ordinary folk. And especially considering how Gary and Jimmy want to draw people in, I admit it sometimes seems that this us and them positioning might potentially push some people away. Just occasionally, the northerner in me can't help hearing Gary and Jimmy as a couple of Londoners giving it large. It's a stereotype I'm guilty of perpetuating myself. When I was growing up, to me the main thing about newsreader types wasn't how posh they sounded, but that they all came from down south. Now, Jimmy has made a great video on the North-South divide, though a brass band doesn't make a West Country accent northern.
Because we perceive the Yorkshire accent as more trustworthy.
'Twas like taking bread to the top of the world.
And maybe I'm misinterpreting, but there's one point where Jimmy does seem to be equating the working class with the London working class.
When I say a working class accent, I mean the classic Cockney geezer working class accent.
However, arguably being a bit ignored as a northerner isn't as bad as being old.
Interpersonally, old people are lovely. You have a lovely chat with them, they're very nice. But I feel as a class, that whole generation, the older generation, old people, that generation rejects us. They look down on us. They see us all as lazy. Look how bad the young people are. Looking down, judging, they don't want to admire our culture. It doesn't feel like they're trying to engage, doesn't ever come across that they're even interested. There's no connection. There's like this gap let down by the older generation.
Yeah, I think it's important not to frame it, even like internally within your head, as the problem is the old people.
But as we're trying to unpack the middle class that Gary and Jimmy are talking about, the main way I felt othered is in the way they define me and my social class out of existence. This is something that people at both ends of society do, and it hinges crucially on the dreaded term middle class. Now, just as public school means something different here, so often does middle class. In the US, middle class usually means the big, broad default a majority of Americans identify as middle class. But here the term is often used to mean a small fraction of society, overlapping approximately with being privately educated. In other words, the upper middle class. Its members often refer to themselves as just middle class. In Britain, the term can be intensified in just this sense. Very middle class, so middle class. But if you subtract from the British population both the working class, however that's defined, and the mostly privately educated elite that calls itself middle class, you're still left with millions and millions of people, a huge chunk of the population, and the social class that, for better or worse, I'm a product of. The ever-ignored lower middles. So when Gary and Jimmy go on about middle class, who are they referring to? For Jimmy, it's the people who are in charge and talk posh and are perceived as having been to good schools.
Who's the guy behind the keyboard, like, pulling the strings? It's always some middle-class dude, like, always speaking very posh. If you hear middle-class accent, and if you associate it with good school, good family, successful.
For Gary, middle class means people who are so aloof that they won't listen to him because of his accent.
This middle class, like, there is a degree to which they kind of hate me. I think the reason that this political class doesn't take me seriously is because of how I talk. I'm at my wit's end almost with this middle class, but I need to figure out how can I communicate with them.
Once in the podcast, he let slip that what he really means is upper middle class.
This political class, which is like quite sort of upper middle class dominated.
I'm not chauvinistic about my class background. I don't support it like a football team. I just find it striking that my chunk of the population, despite its size, gets marginalised from above and below. And in my personal experience, there's less of a boundary between Gary and Jimmy's working class and my lower middle than there is between all of us and the upper middles. I mean, let's face it, privately educated kids grow up effectively segregated.
I have friends who are aristocrats, I have friends who are upper class, I have friends who are, working class, but I'm not working class.
Whereas among the state-educated 93%, the lower middles and the working class end up rubbing shoulders much more. At least that was my experience long ago in a galaxy far, far away. I grew up in a classic lower middle semi-detached house, but a lot of my school friends and my closest relatives were working class, speaking with stronger local accents and living on the housing estates where I spent so much of my time. Now much has changed in the decades since, and I recommend Jimmy's recent video on the petty bourgeoisie. But I have to say I'm curious, would Gary and Jimmy really think I identify more with Rory Stewart than with them? Maybe I'm just too old to think about it all. Anyway, having slightly unpacked middle class in social terms, let's look at the phonetics. And to do this, because accents are much easier to show than explain, I'm going to use the legendary 1966 class sketch from the TV satire show The Frost Report, a forerunner of many things including Monty Python.
I look down on him because I am upper class.
I look up to him because he is upper class.
But I look down on him because he is lower class.
I am middle class. I know my place.
This is RP. The guy played by John Cleese has classic RP features like ooh in to him.
Sometimes I look up to him,
just like the dictionary symbol, which still hasn't been updated except in my dictionary. And he has a lax vowel on the end of superiority.
I get a feeling of superiority.
These things tell us he almost certainly went to a public school, but note that he's dressed for work. He probably has an office job. He's unlikely to be an aristocrat, so although the sketch calls him upper class for simplicity's sake, he's more likely upper middle class. Neither of these two guys went to a public school. If they did at the time, they'd speak like him. And of course, they're both from the southeast of England. Where else? This guy's working class status isn't in question. The only thing worth pointing out is that his humility is very pre-1960s. The accent adopted by comedy genius Ronnie Barker is the upper, more pretentious end of what today we'd probably call estuary. Remember the Price vowel? John Cleese has a relatively front RP quality, while Ronnie Barker has the more back London estuary quality.
I am upper class. I look up to him.
Let's just compare that with the mouth vowel, as in down. Here the qualities are the exact opposite.
I look down on him. I look down on him. Down, 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 down.
In 1966, only this guy could present the news. TV and radio were stuffed with this accent.
This is BBC Television.
This guy's accent was mostly restricted to sitcoms. He probably couldn't even have been a commentator on a football match. The sketch calls him middle class for simplicity's sake, but phonetically he's lower middle class. So where are we now? Well, thanks to satire like this show and all the other happenings of the 60s, this accent, though not exactly extinct, wouldn't be left near the news because it's too posh to be taken seriously. These guys' accents, and their regional equivalents in the world beyond Luton, are still around and very, very widespread. But the cold, hard truth is that they still don't sound like news presenters. That news presenter type accent that people around the world hear more than any other British accent is today's SSB, Standard Southern British. I literally wrote an entire book detailing the differences between RP and modern SSB. Now, RP's status really did invert from prestige to laughingstock, but there was never a wholesale British revolution, as I say in my book. In contemporary Britain, diversity is celebrated. Prominent figures in business, politics, academia and the media exhibit a range of accents, but London and the South are still dominant in wealth, power and influence. Accents of the South, particularly middle and upper middle class accents, are heard more often than others in public life and in the TV programmes and films that are seen internationally. So the social group most likely to speak SSB are the middle and most of all upper middle classes of the south of England. But there are lots of people like me or, I don't know, Zach Polanski, who are either near to SSB or, if you define it broadly enough, might actually be included in it. Since we're talking about news presenters, if you want some 21st century examples of SSB, go to TLDR News. So this is the kind of pronunciation that Gary and Jimmy think would get them taken more seriously. Gary is passionate about spreading his economic and political ideas, so it's not surprising how upset he is that his accent, his phonetics, are, as he sees it, a practically existential obstacle to his agenda.
The reason that this political class doesn't take me seriously is because of how I talk. I was convinced that simply because of the way that I look and the way that I sound, there was no legitimate way in.
What then is to be done? Well, there are a couple of strategies that might be used to get round Gary's phonetic obstacle. I'll call them the My Fair Lady strategy and the Cyrano de Bergerac strategy. The My Fair Lady strategy, of course, is to change your accent.
I want to be a lady in a flower shop instead of selling at the corner of Tottenham Court Road. But they won't take me unless I can talk more genteel. He said he could teach me. Well, here I am.
Eliza Doolittle could see that her working class accent was an absolute obstacle to achieving her goal. Nowadays, we tend to look at Shaw's story as a quaint Edwardian fable, a sign of its time. But here in the 21st century, Gary Stevenson sees himself as being literally in Eliza Doolittle's position. The difference between then and now is not the perceived obstacle. That hasn't changed. It's the unacceptability of the solution. The socialist George Bernard Shaw, who wrote the story, saw received pronunciation as a leveller. The solution to language prejudice was for everyone to learn RP. And if that strikes you as funny, culture guru Jonathan Meades, from whom we heard before, feels the same way, which is why he mourns RP's passing.
RP was the linguistic monoculture which has disappeared. It was an instrument of social mobility which no longer exists.
However, I'm sure that Gary and Jimmy feel attached to, identified with their accent type and would be outraged, filled with class anger at the idea of giving it up. Besides, Gary is completely explicit about wanting to pursue the alternative strategy, the Cyrano de Bergerac strategy, to keep yourself in the shadows and woo your intended audience through a more presentable mouthpiece.
Barcelonnette. Très bien.
And if you think I'm joking about that, Gary seems completely serious about it.
I need anyone who's out there who has a middle class accent, take these ideas, run them in your words. Don't say this Gary's ideas. That's really important, because I think as long as it's Gary's idea, they will never accept it. It needs to become normalised within the middle class, and the middle class needs to feel that they invented it.
Yes.
Really, what I want is an academic to come up with a theory, never mention my name, copy my ideas exactly, and like say it was you. That is what I need, because I think they will never accept it as long as they feel it came from me.
And so to my informal experiment. I wanted to put to the test a kind of digital hybrid of the My Fair Lady and the Cyrano de Bergerac strategies. So with a little help from 11 Labs, I've effectively given Gary and Jimmy a My Fair Lady makeover. Or to put it another way, I've allowed them, a la Cyrano, to speak through contemporary middle-class mouthpieces. I chose 2 SSB voices, one of them sounding to me a little older and a little posher than the other. I painstakingly dubbed several excerpts from the podcast, some of which you've already heard with their real voices. And here they are now. As you watch, ask yourself, does the accent change affect your perception of Gary and Jimmy? And if so, does it make them more persuasive? Remember, I haven't tried to edit the words at all.
If you watch me go on Rest as Politics, it's quite funny actually, because I basically say, like, I think the reason that this political class doesn't take me seriously is because of how I talk. And Rory Stewart comes back and says, I think it's because of your class anger, which is basically, it's because of how you talk. Because I don't think it's because you're poor. It's because you're poor. You're poor. Basically what he's saying is, yes, we do judge you because you're working class, but we are correct to do that.
And that's why I'm saying that's that pure Victorian British attitude. You're allowed to be poor, but you can't be angry about it.
These guys, they would give me their money to invest.
Yeah.
Like if they want their money invested, it goes to me or somebody like me. But like, in terms of like, who do they use to protect their wealth? Me. But when it comes to me giving my opinion, sorry, you can manage my money, but you can't express your opinion.
You can see how just accent, background and stuff affects whether people trust you. When we grow up, when you watch a film, when you watch James Bond, what are the people like? Who's the guy behind the keyboard, like pulling the strings? It's always some middle-class dude, like always speaking very posh. And that is a story that we're told constantly. It's reinforced in our lives, because when you go to, I don't know, interact with anything that seems official, they're probably like middle-class, blah, blah, blah. When you watch the news, it's always middle-class, and Britain knew this. This is why we created like RP, that way of speaking that news presenters have, because they understand that like you see these people as authoritative based on just pure basic things. Because what it does, like humans are very simple. We have lots of things to think about when we go through our lives. But if you hear middle-class accent, and if you associate it with good school, good family, successful, then you've just saved your brain a load of effort to try and work this person out. You just go, I can trust him. But obviously it's bullshit, because it doesn't mean that they are trustworthy. It just, you've sort of like tied together a bunch of things. That's created through social conditioning.
I'm at my wit's end almost with this middle class, but I need to figure out how can I communicate with them, because like they need me, because I think as long as it's Gary's idea, they will never accept it. It needs to become normalized within the middle class, and the middle class needs to feel that they invented it. Really, what I want is an academic to come up with a theory, never mention my name, copy my ideas exactly, and like say it was you. That's what I need, because I think they will never accept it as long as they feel it came from me.
I'll give you my reactions in a second, but you can enter yours in a short poll that I've linked to below. Well, of course, the accent replacement isn't technically perfect, and I couldn't control for intonation and voice quality, which are a part of accent anyway. But I did find myself suspending disbelief and accepting the changed voices as coming from the 2 speakers. And, despite being a linguist, Despite having made videos opposing language prejudice, despite subscribing to both these guys' channels and being interested in what they have to say, despite, as I thought, feeling as much empathy with working class as with upper middle, despite all that, the dubbed version did seem to me a bit less rambling, somewhat more structured, more thought out, even more grammatical, though the words were unchanged, which shocked me. Now, did that make me more likely to believe them or take their ideas seriously? So what did you think? Please leave your comments and enter your reactions in the poll linked below. And thank you again to Raycon for sponsoring the video.